to have you here. I know it's a bit of a difficult day, Friday morning, 9 a.m. We have one more panelist who's going to join us in a minute, but I think we'll just give it a start. So this is a very important session this morning, and I think very important topic on inclusive finance. So as we're looking at how people are going to afford transformations for climate resilience, it's really important to design types of finance products that are actually helping, that are accessible, that are including people in the design, but also in basically making a move towards adaptation practices. Very quickly to introduce the panel that we have Vito Intini to my left here, who's the Regional Chief Economist and Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Finance Team Leader for UNDP Arab States. To my left is my dear colleague, Sarah Rabia. She's a Climate Peace and Security Specialist for the MENA Regional Climate Security Hub of CGIAR based in Cairo, Egypt. And in a minute, we also have Dr. Hamul Amrani joining us, who's the Economic Affairs Officer at UNESCO. So let's start with round one. We'll have 2 rounds of questions. So Vito, maybe I will start with you. Thank you so much for joining us. So given the very diverse agricultural landscapes and socioeconomic context across the MENA region, how can financing models be tailored to ensure that they're inclusive, addressing the needs of both smallholder farms and larger agricultural enterprises, while also promoting climate smart packages? What's your take on it? Thanks, Vito. Just press the button.
Thank you very much. So we are talking about 2 very different categories here. Let's start with the first one. When we look at the latest, which is 2021, so not so latest data, Findex data, in terms of access to a bank account, for example, rural areas in the region have around 26% of the rural population basically have an account, compared to a global average of around 46%. So almost half. This is already telling you a lot in terms of the challenges that we can think of. When we look at private sector climate-related green private finance, the estimates are that not even 2% of GDP in terms of flows annually will come to the region. So those are, in terms of aggregate figures, quite remarkable challenges to start with. But let's look into the specific aspects of the first category. So there are a number of solutions that can be designed to this effort in order to increase access to finance for small farmers. Of course, microcredit has been there over ages. There have been challenges. We all know the challenges in terms of transaction cost, unit cost per loan disbursed. They are pretty high. There are ways to get around it in terms of reducing that unit cost, but still the challenges are there. Related to that, across rural areas and in the region, microinsurance is one important aspect. We are talking about climate change. We are talking about shocks, droughts, desertification. Microinsurance is increasingly an instrument that can be used in different ways through community-based systems, pulling together different farmers, so that again, the cost would be reduced on unit basis. Then you have many other potential solutions. One is, of course, concessional credit for farmers that have in their operations and their own investment decisions, the provision of public goods. So natural, positive impact. This is something that we see emerging But you know, it's we are monitoring. We would like to see more to see if that is a kind of instrumental for a new type of approaches across the region and beyond. Then you have dedicated credit lines for farmers. Those have shown mixed results, some positive results and some others that have to show more in the long term, the positive results related to that. Then there is a whole aspect related to leasing, so access to financial services for fixed capital, for short-term investment. The leasing industry in the region, in the agriculture rural sector, is promising, has potential, but again, you know, needs to pick up a bit further. Going back to insurance, the insurance coverage or penetration in the region is around 2% of GDP. So there is a huge potential there in order to pick up. Then there is the whole area of credit guarantee that can be applicable for small to medium-sized farmers. And again, depending on who issued those credit guarantees, the experience is mixed across the region. Then we have the systemic, let's say, environment-related, context-related issues. Because business environment remains critical, one aspect is related to also dispute resolutions. Whenever you don't have access to dispute resolution mechanism, of course, a risk aversion of financial institutions gets higher than it should be, and therefore can be a barrier to further financial access. And the whole regulatory aspect related to all the instruments I was talking about as well. So this is on the small farmer side. On the larger farmer side, the challenges are very different and the solutions are different. One critical aspect is increasingly over the last 10 years, the disclosures. So basically taxonomy, framework for climate-related disclosure standards related to that. There has been a convergence of different standards under the IFRS initiative. Now there are 2 sets of standards that are progressing, and that is very much applicable to large farmers. So that's on the reporting side. The second aspect is related to bonds, corporate bonds. So we can think of large companies, particularly in the agro-processing sector, that could issue bonds where part of the proceedings are related to environmentally positive investments. And the third aspect is related to PPP and project financing. Here, of course, there are many, you know, we move along the chain of complexity of those solutions. There are ways to structure these instruments, both in terms of project financing, through rig fencing and so on and so forth, where basically some of these investments are done jointly through public sector and private investors as well. And those are promising in the region. Again, the results are mixed, but we see some positive results. There has been a desalination infrastructure in Rabat, for example, that is a result of PPP, the water of which is being used for farmers, for agricultural purposes, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are a number of considerations in terms of proper design, proper implementation of the project itself that need to be taken into consideration. Then one critical aspect that is important to bear in mind is the overall taxonomy, because that the green taxonomy that many regulators around the world are moving forward have not been approved yet in the region, but there is an acceleration. We see a lot of regulators are moving in that direction. That will be an important signal for large companies and large farmers to take into consideration in the immediate future. I will stop here for the...
No, thank you so much, Vito. I mean, that was a very comprehensive overview, lots of very, very interesting facts and figures. And I think also very interesting to see that this might need a very differential approach, right? Such different issues if you talk about smallholders versus larger farms, and us in the region kind of being able to design instruments that are able to capture both, right? And are flexible or differential enough to work for both of these scenarios. Fascinating. Thank you so much for that first insight. Moving over to Hammu. I've already introduced you earlier, Hammu. So ESCO has been instrumental in shaping economic policy in the MENA region. From your perspective, what are the key policy reforms needed to create a conducive environment for sustainable and inclusive financing for climate-smart agriculture, especially in aligning national development plans with climate goals? And having just heard from Vito what the challenges are, what should be the policy responses? How can policy create an enabling environment that can basically encourage both small farmers and larger companies to invest in climate resilience? Vito, if you could maybe pass on.
Thank you, Tina, and thanks to the team for putting this side event on. Well, actually, there are three perspectives to look at what policies are needed to accelerate and encourage investment in climate smart agriculture. The first element is that investment in agriculture in general across the region has been stagnant for a long time. The policies that are tending to be more equitable in access to finance for small-scale farmers are not innovative enough. I mean, the policies were probably benefiting agribusiness and large investments and access of companies that are producing crops for exports or for external markets have been benefiting more in terms of subsidies. And we have concrete examples. Let me just give you one simple example. Last year, that's 2023, in Morocco, a farmer that is cultivating 1 hectare of tomato for exports gets a $6,000 subsidies from the government, while a small-scale farmer producing the same amount of tomato for the domestic market does not get any subsidies. So this kind of inequalities in access that could encourage the farmer to convert and shift to smart, climate-smart agriculture is inequitable by design. And that's why ESCO is emphasizing the need for equity in access to subsidies and equity in prioritizing the adaptation programs that could support the transition for the small-scale farmers. Because large farmers have the assets, have the guarantee, have access to multiple forms and mechanisms of access to finance that the small-scale farmers don't have. Inequity could also be have a gender dimension. Farmers have only one guarantee to provide to the bank to get access to credit. is land, and women does not have access to land. So by design, there is already a kind of inequity in the policies themselves, because they assume that men and women have the same chances to access forms of finance, either through the banks or through the government programs. Also, the fact that we think of climate smart agriculture as an adaptation, and the adaptation policies are improving, but they are not yet equitable enough. They are not yet inclusive enough. And also the fact that climate resilience is almost defined as a luxury compared to the development needs and priorities for the government. And the incremental investment that is needed for climate adaptation and climate resilience is still small compared to the needs. So Squad tries to find out new financing mechanisms to be dedicated to climate action. And one of them is the debt swap. We have been working over the last years with Mauritania, Jordan, and Tunisia to shift the credits to climate action. And so far, this has been progressing quite well with Jordan and Tunisia, and recently with Mauritania. Those are examples of where support to the emerging policies that could put climate action and agriculture in particular in the heart of the adaptation of effort, but also in building the resilience. And I think another piece of information that we worked on, and that turns out to be quite significant, is the investment through remittances. With the vagues and the waves of migration that this region has witnessed over the last decade, the amount of money transferred from the immigrants is contributing to promotion of agriculture. And the figures are quite significant and undermined. We don't look into how much that has contributed to modernizing the small-scale agriculture in some parts of the countries that are having an important communities living abroad and transferring funds to their families. Again, the global climate finance, I think, is somehow overestimated. And if you think of how much countries invest in their effort to adapt to climate change, and how much the global climate finance is providing so far, that's a small portion. That's not what is doing the difference today. I think what farmers themselves do in terms of adapting to climate and preparing themselves to introduce new varieties, new seeds, new practices in agriculture is driven by their own investment and efforts. So the global climate finance is, to me at least, quite elusive, and they should not put too much emphasis on something that didn't work since Copenhagen copied. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamo, for this quite critical assessment, but also really important to kind of realize what these flaws are in the designs, right? Why is it not working, and where can we find entry points towards making a change? So you were talking about the design of the actual products, but also design of the policies themselves and the built-in inequalities that are specifically big in this region. I think mentioning gender, I think that's a very important one, and the need to redesign financing products for women specifically with these issues of collaterals and access, I think is a very, very important point. And I hope we can elaborate a little bit more on this in the second round, but I would like to pass over to Sarah right now, my colleague on the Focus Climate Security team. So of course, CGIAR has a strong focus on agricultural systems and adaptation to climate change. Our team is working on doing this in inclusive and peace positive ways. So bringing in the climate security and peace perspective. Sarah, how can CGIAR's work in the MENA region be better integrated into climate-smart agriculture financing mechanisms to ensure broad adoption and long-term sustainability from your perspective?
Thank you so much, Tina. I think it's very important for us to look at the nexus or the correlation between sustainable food systems and sustainable agri-food systems and sustaining peace and development from the lens of social cohesion and building social resilience in regions such as the MENA region that suffer from both social fragilities, conflicts, and political dynamics that have been challenging, to say the least, for the past decades. And also a region being extremely food insecure, water insecure. There's a lot to take into consideration when it comes to this dynamic in the region. These positive, climate resilient agri-food systems, I think, are one of the main key priorities that arise when we look at the question of how can we build sustainable food systems that are also climate resilient and also address the peace and security needs of the region. As CGIAR, we have done thorough research on the topic and on the nexus for the past couple of years. And I think for the past year, we've been working in contexts such as Jordan, specifically with a lens on refugees and refugee cohesion, their integration into the society in Jordan through the lens of agri-food systems, through the lens of climate resilient agriculture, and how we can better integrate them through that lens in the societies. These refugees have come into Jordan 10 years ago or 10 years plus. So they might not be leaving anytime soon. They are part of the social fabric. They are part of the dynamics that exist within these contexts. So we need to kind of have a look at the question of where do they lie, how are they positioned in that system, and how equipped is the system to include the refugees in a way that also sustains social cohesion between the host and the displaced communities. So the research that we did was basically focusing on the transition from cash-based assistance to long-term climate resilient agriculture that sustains livelihoods in Jordan with a focus specifically on the Syrian refugees. And this was done in contexts such as Irbid and Al-Mafraq in Jordan. So these communities, these refugee communities, have taken up occupations in livestock and in farming. In Mafraq, they were more on the livestock end. They were more like grazers, and in Irbid, they were more on the agricultural end. They were farmers. And these refugees came into Jordan with a lot of technical knowledge about farming. They're really good at what they do. They have a lot of good financial, good background when it comes to how to do good agricultural practices. And then the host communities were also a bit maybe lacking on that end, or not as good as the refugees. So they needed the technical support of the refugees. But then the refugees had the issue of how do we integrate them? How do we formalize their work? How do we formalize how they receive funds, and how can we represent them better when it comes to the type of financial support that is needed for these refugees in Jordan? And the study, the research was more on the needs-based and the supply end. So the demand end and the supply end, what do we need and what are the shortcomings? And I will very briefly discuss some of the most important findings of this research. Of course, I fully agree with what you mentioned, Hammo, on the issue of making funding, making financial products, microfinance products, context-specific. And this was very important as an outcome of the research, not only when it comes to the differences between the host communities, the priorities of host communities and the refugee communities, but also something like, as you mentioned, women, the gender component. Collaterals are one of the main hurdles for female refugees to get access to financial products, microfinance products, or whether it be loans or any type of microfinancing provided for these refugees. So collaterals were one of the main hurdles for refugees, and also the issue of land ownership and the gender component when we look at land ownership in contexts such as Jordan and the Syrian refugees. Something else was contextualizing, as you said, Hammo, contextualizing financial products. Microfinance, for example, when it came to the host communities, the Jordanian host communities who thought that loans are haram. So receiving loans from banks with interest is something that is frowned upon, whereas whereas the displaced communities or the refugees, the Syrians, were more acceptable to deal with banks in that term. So basically, an overall study of the landscape of the debt and the loan landscape in Jordan between the host communities and the refugee communities also shed light on the idea that there's a sense of seasonality that we need to adopt from the demand side as well. These loans need to have a grace period at the beginning, where the refugees have just started their projects. They have just started working on their own investments, on their own projects, on their own small scale agricultural projects. I'll wrap up very soon. But that would mean that we cannot ask them to pay up very early on. They need to generate profit, they need to sell, they need to produce before we start asking them to pay up. So a sensible grace period at the beginning was also something that the research produced as one of the outcomes. And basically, we need good monitoring and evaluation of these projects. The host communities and the displaced communities have indicated a sense that they're apprehensive when it comes to dealing with banks. They trust NGOs a lot more. They trust international organizations a lot more. They don't have trust in engaging with the banking. The financial sector is something that is a bit worrisome to them. They would rather receive loans, and they would rather receive funds in an informal matter, like they would rather loan money to each other and adopt an informal lending and lending mechanism than to deal with banks and having to deal with the issues of financing and interest and all of that. This was also something that needed a lot of capacity building and awareness raising. We need to build awareness on how to have accessible, sustainable, informed systems of microfinancial products and microfinancing dynamics and systems in countries such as Jordan, and in countries where there is a host community that is also to a certain extent impoverished, but as well as a refugee community that is in need of a very sustainable and very urgent financial support, in a way, in a dynamic that also ensures that social cohesion exists, where not one community feels like they got the short end of the stick when it comes to financial support and microfinance products vis-a-vis the other. So these are all, once we take them into consideration and through the research that was conducted by CGIAR in the past year, these are all components that we could take into consideration when we move forward, when we advise on microfinance products and how to make them make sense, basically, and how to make them supportive of social cohesion and building resilience and sustaining peace in communities in the MENA region. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So we've already heard a lot of interesting points now in round one that are very relevant to how we can include small farmers in taking up financial products for climate resilience. So we've heard about a lack of bank accounts, a lack of insurance products, built-in inequalities in the design, gender inequalities, lack of collaterals, subsidies being designed in unequal ways, but then also about certain marginalized groups such as refugees just not having any access, right? Or having less access to financing products. And again, this might mean designing products in a way that would include these groups and finding out more about the needs of these groups and doing assessments of what such products actually would have to look like, right? At what point would a refugee take a loan to invest in climate finance? How can we include that kind of knowledge and expertise to benefit the country? And then on the other hand, what's the legal environment that has to be created to ensure that refugees are allowed to take up loans, right? So it goes both ways in a way. Vito, I'd like to come back to you to kind of find out more about what you think. I mean, what can really be done? What are some practical steps that we could do to encourage smallholders or refugees or excluded groups to take up loans? Can the private sector maybe play a role? What about financial institutions at the local level, at the national level? Do you see any entry points, any role for the private sector maybe to play a bigger role in this scenario?
Yeah, thank you. Just to complement on one aspect, important aspect, there is a strong component of seasonality in the agriculture-based production, obviously. So microfinance will need to look into that aspect and address it, because cash flow is an important constraint for a small farmer. And obviously the cash flow follows that seasonality. And the second aspect is, okay, how can you enforce your assets, the enforceability of assets? If you don't have access to those assets, they are not registered. They are all linked to the informality aspect that both of you were referring to. Those are major constraints that become a bit of a kind of business environment related systemic constraint. So one aspect related also to your point is, in some countries, the Know Your Customer KYC restrictions have been released a bit. So if you are a refugee and you don't have a passport, you have a ID card that is issued by either the UNHCR or whoever agency that deals with that, that can allow you to have access to small type of size of accounts. Related to that, you have also e-wallet, digital payments. Those are important progressively because they can build a bit of the seeds of your credit history, because you will do payments on that, and therefore can build a bit of credit history that one day, once you have a small farm, a small business, you can use for better access or better conditions for a small loan, for example. Then there is the whole aspect related to value chain. Now, increasingly, blockchain is being used to record, trace your contribution to the value chain, and therefore having access, use that to have a better access to financial services. So all this is becoming increasingly, if you look at all these different aspects, the challenge is to put all this together. You will need a good credit bureau, a good collateral registry that unfortunately in some countries in the region are not really covering to an extent that would be great to see, but there is a lot of potential there as well. Then when you look at the bigger picture, you have also market regulators that can play an important role. Increasingly, central banks are looking into the impact of climate change and natural disasters on the financial system. Through stress testing, they look at the impact on the provisioning, on the profitability of banks, on the capital adequacy ratio. So those are systemic aspects that need to be there also for the medium-sized farmers that have access or will have access to more formalized financial services. And but all of this needs to be seen also in a major constraint. Going back to the subsidies, energy subsidies in the region are close to 10% of GDP. Whereas a private finance, as I was saying, is something like 0.2%. We need also to rebalance a bit this equation, because otherwise it will be difficult that only the public finance component can address these huge challenges that we were talking about. Going back to the gender aspect, one critical component linked to the digital payment and to the whole infrastructure we're talking about is disaggregated data. Because actually, we don't know a lot of these consumption, saving, and investment decisions that are done. We need better disaggregated data that can help us in the policymaking process. Going back to the crisis aspects, one analysis we were doing related to Sudan was rural farmers, women-headed rural farms. This is, okay, a specific crisis, but I think the dynamics will not be that different. Their ability to access to market and to move to markets under a major shock like a war for female-headed farmers reduced drastically. And therefore their coping mechanism and the resilience are disproportionately affected as well. So we need also to design those specific financial support, having this in mind as well.
Thank you so much. And perhaps also opportunities to co-design these products with communities, right? Because it becomes very evident that there's very differential needs that need to be covered. So perhaps the finance product landscape has to be a lot more diversified and respond to these different needs. I also was interesting that you mentioned the credit history. I mean, this is another aspect that came up in our recent work in Jordan, where a lot of small farmers and refugees, they simply don't have that credit history. They're not, they just don't have the securities, right? So perhaps there have to be different assessment mechanisms, perhaps also different institutions involved, not just the national, accreditation institutions, but perhaps UN agencies, local NGOs who are very familiar with communities. So how do we build maybe like an alternative system for providing those, those credit histories or those accreditations that, certain groups are missing? Hamo, please feel free to comment in any way, anything that comes to mind, but also ESCWA, of course, has a regional role, right? So how do you see, ESCWA's function in terms of creating more of a regional approach to this issue? Have you made any efforts in terms of working with financing projects or institutions across the region? Where does water come into this? We're a very water scarce region, this looking at the WEF nexus and the connection between water and climate change. Where do you see the opportunities for the region? We have the Arab Water Council represented here also.
Thank you, Tina. Actually, a lot of good ideas have already been presented by my colleagues in the panel. I think thinking of the connection, small-scale farming, climate risks and opportunities in the region, it's all about uncertainty. The issue with the small farmer, if he has enough rain and enough water and access to inputs timely and sufficiently, there will be no problem. But the problem is that there is a lot of uncertainty. Take, for example, Tunisia and Morocco. Over the last 5 years, they have the lowest rain in maybe 5 decades. And the experience with the financing institutions, local financing institutions, with the small-scale farmers are recurrent failures. And banks are about profit. They are not doing charity. And they are not doing social interventions that the state should do. So a combination of developing local schemes of insurance, innovating in these local schemes of insurance, where farmers are part of the shareholders, so that they will not depend on external profit makers that will probably weaken the capacity of the insurance schemes. Two, maybe diversification could be the clue. Small-scale farmer is a farmer, is producing crops. He has a cow or a camel or a goat, but he's also having a small shop nearby. So this kind of multiple small things that will buffer the risks of seasonal failure if rain is not there. That's a way of providing a safety net that is easy to develop locally, and that some farmers, as I usually say, farmers are not stupid. They are just poor, and they have limited assets. And if we think of the diversification, we also need to think of how to bring in the large companies as aggregators of the small-scale farmers. And this experience has already happened in Morocco, where the government, instead of giving subsidies and direct payments, they pay the company, and the company guarantees access of the small-scale farm products to international markets. I mean, small-scale producers of tomato and pepper in southern Morocco can have access to a supermarket in Hungary or Bulgaria or Spain. But this kind of innovation in connecting the gatekeepers, the large investors, to the small-scale farmers. Contract farming, I think if had experience in Nuberia, for instance, that introduced long ago when we were with IDRC, the contract farming has worked, and it's win-win. I mean, for the big company, but also for the small-scale farmers. Of course, the government's role is also important in terms of encouraging this kind of partnerships. Again, another element that we should not undermine in terms of solutions to how small-scale farmers could adapt better to challenges of climate security is governance. And by governance here, I mean anti-corruption measures. If you think of the idea of the flow of finance that comes to government and the flow that is invested by the government are different parts of the investments of public treasury, you will see that quite a big portion of money is just lost, leakage. So at some stage, we need to think of how to minimize that and make sure that money for climate finance is channelized in a transparent and accountable way. This will serve the small farmers, they will serve men and women. And then finally, agricultural adaptation to climate change should not be discussed outside the frame of development challenges and responses to climate risks and climate impact. We should focus on farmers, but we should focus on what other sectors could do for agriculture. The tourism industry could serve small-scale farmer. Think of new channels to support the small-scale farmers by hosting a couple of tourists for 7 days may bring more money than farming fava beans for a year if the rain is not there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamu. Very interesting ideas for diversification, right? Connecting different actors, maybe opening up new kind of side businesses for farmers that would actually decrease the risk also in a way. So no, very, very nice. Thank you so much. Sarah, going back to the story of including refugees in climate investments, which, as you said, I mean, in Jordan, refugees are very valued for their experience, expertise in climate resilient farming. How do we ensure that they can actually contribute, you know, through investments as well? So how can we make sure that, you know, such products are not only advancing investments, but also advancing social cohesion and peace as these groups are working together in the communities?
Okay, thank you, Sina. I think an informed analysis and an informed assessment prior to the start of any project is, I think, one of the key priorities that we need to do. A contextualized, up-to-date, or case-specific analysis of the needs and requirements, or the needs as a needs assessment that is truly reflective of the needs on the ground is a good starting point for us. I think overall, financial products or investing in agri-systems, investing in agri-food systems in a way that sustains social cohesion, whether it be refugees, whether it be different ethnic groups, whether it be, we've seen this happen, for example, in Somalia, where agri-food microfinancing products or agri-food systems or projects also had a lens to foster social cohesion, to foster the integration of different ethnic groups together in a certain geographic space. So we can learn from that, or we can replicate that to take into consideration, for example, that our projects have a component of building social cohesion, building fostering the idea that we all need each other, and that we are all relying on the presence of the other party or the other person in order to foster a more holistic and co-beneficial project. So I wouldn't say interdependence in a negative sense, but just interconnectedness and the integration of these two different groups together is also something that we could consider in a way that if we want to discuss sustaining peace or sustaining social cohesion. So I think a lot of the respondents, for example, of the report that I was mentioning, discussed that there's a us versus them type of modality. There is financing for host communities and financing for refugee communities. Perhaps we can maybe start looking at projects or financing products that integrate both communities, that integrate refugees as well as the host communities that also are in need of support. I think host communities, to a certain extent, may start to feel like they are underserviced in comparison to the host refugee, the displaced communities that are receiving the funds and the support from the international community, from NGOs, from funders, basically. So this is one thing that we could consider, which is interdependency or interconnectedness in a more positive tone. Something else that we need to perhaps consider is the context specificity that we have discussed since the beginning of this panel, that there are specific needs that we need to take into consideration, whether it be the gender perspective, whether it be the Islamic or religious perspectives, whether it be the social perspectives, where, for example, some host communities prefer to work in certain aspects or certain skills. They have a certain skill set, whereas the refugee communities have another skill set. Even within the refugee communities, we need to identify what do they actually want to work in. So designing projects and designing microfinance products that are also reflective of the skill set that the refugees have arrived with. What do they actually want to work in? What are they good at? In general, the skill set that they've arrived with is also very important in order to not push them into industries that they do not specifically, they do not want to work in, or to force them to drop their skills or drop their basically what they're good at in a way, in order to adopt another skill set, to push them into an industry that they don't particularly want to be part of. This is also something very important to take into consideration. So I think overall, this is a very big conversation. But the key is context specificity and awareness and informed methods and approaches before starting a project or before going forward in a context that is as specific and as sensitive as refugees and host communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So maybe also in the design of the loans, there could be a promotion of certain modalities or even conditionality in a sense. I think in the study it was also asked, would you consider taking a loan in a project that is co-run by refugees and host community members, so that could foster social cohesion and collaboration and investment? Also interestingly, in that study, most respondents were actually quite open to conditionality when it comes to climate resilience. So we asked people, would you take a loan if that loan required you to check off certain boxes like water harvesting, solar irrigation, greenhouses? And people were quite positive because they knew that these things will help them against climate change. So also thinking about perhaps linking loans to certain behaviors or practices could be another idea. Thank you so much for these insights. I actually wanted to open it up a little bit. We have very distinguished audience here. So if you'd like to contribute any ideas from your side on inclusive finance, how do we bring in small farmers? How do we change the system, the landscape of products, the political framing of these basically conditions to enhance that? Please, I'm just going to pass it around. We're a very small group, so.
Thank you very much, Tina. My name is Hussein Atfi. I'm the Secretary General of the Arab Water Council. So in fact, I'm honored to be here with such distinguished speakers today. And I enjoyed the discussion, really, because this is one of the areas that we are all need to work together. The small farmers is the core of what we need. Really, and the farmer by nature is intelligent, and he looks to have to benefit from lessons learned, and this is why this financing is a very important. Access to finance especially for the small holder, it's really an important pillar. But let us see that's how we can empower farmers. Since the legislation, you see, it's one of the things that water user associations could be empowered, could be part of the decisions making. And then this is one of the areas that we should work on, how to engagement in the decision making. This is one of the areas. Then you mentioned about the private sector. Private sectors, needs to have a balance. What he's going to do and how it comes to get a return. So this is the area how we attract the private sector to come on board and be a support for this. This needs also a policy. Maybe incentives should be policy for incentives, either for the farmers or for the private sector together. And then another area that governance, you mentioned, Dr. Hamid. This is one of the areas, it's very important, how to enhance the governments in water resources, how to work on integrated manner, as you mentioned now. Not only water, still you have energy, still you have environment, all of this. And of course, this is one of the area, Wi-Fi is, Nexus is one of the areas should be there also, I think. The thing of maybe also the government should support the farmers, as you mentioned, Tina, about this protection and insurance, and all of these. I believe we already have done a study on Jordan together with partners, and it comes, and it was the involved ministry was there, and I believe they have some improvement for their policies, how to deal with the farmers, small farmers, especially, to come on as an relaxed and intelligent to manage its farm. So we have to look at this from integrated approach, as you mentioned. Finance is a main issue here, and about loans also, how we can give loans with a small impact on the farmer, because yes, this is an area of how they support the marketing, how all of these things. So it's a common in the Arab region how we can improve this situation. But I believe also exchange experiences, lessons learned, it's a must here. How we can learn from this, because there are some Arab countries that are doing well in this. So we have to learn from this and put this, and also capacity building, education, awareness. This is, and we started this in our academy. We start to put, we have the Arab Water Academy. We start to put some programs to educate farmers, technicians, and extension people. you know, the extension also. Extension people from the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Water Resources, they are also should be educated, should be the capacity of them should be enhanced. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Muhammad Dawood, I'm a senior water advisor at Environment Agency Abu Dhabi. I'm working as a freelance consultant with FAO now in Egypt for a similar project. And I will give you my experience after 1.5 years. We started to implement some climate smart agriculture practices in 3 governorates in Egypt, Kafr Sheikh, Minya, and Kenya. And we did spend a lot of investment through a joint venture between FAO and the Japanese government. We spend a lot of millions for implementing infrastructure for greenhouses in Kafr Sheikh, solar power drip irrigation for a common area of about 53 fiddan for 50 users, and dripping irrigation powered by solar also for sugarcane. The main challenge was not the financing. We did finance, we did implement, we did some what we call the school farmers to educate and learn them. But the main challenge when we finalize and complete the project and we started to hand over the assets, we take 6 months of dilemma, and until today it's not solved. Who will operate and manage after we leave? And no one. We go to the Ministry of Agriculture and said, no, this is not our responsibility. We went to Dr. Hani in the Ministry of Irrigation and said, no, this is not my responsibility. And then after meeting between the 2 ministries, we came to make users association. And the user association are farmers and they don't have financial capabilities, technical capabilities to manage and operate. And this is exactly what we have. We are challenging in our hand. Yes, but the user you selected, there are 7 farmers. They cannot read and write. You can imagine how they will operate and manage very high technical, smart, resilient solutions. So financing is not the issue. The governance and what is after the implementation is the solution, is the issue.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So we also have Rola Majdalani join us now, who is one of our panelists. She's a senior advisor with ICARDA on climate change. So perhaps if we can have your perspective on inclusive finance, and then also if you have something to share, then you're more than welcome. Please, Rola.
Yeah, let me take it from this point. Actually, it's very important because even if you design the best projects, if you don't think of the capacity and the human capacity from the start and who is going to take over and how do you retain the good ones, because some of the good ones, they are excellent and then some donors snatch them, unfortunately. So you really need to be thinking about how do you want to retain and build that capacity right before and throughout the process. And on the inclusive finance, I'm sure that Hamo has covered many of these issues because some of the long-term work that we have done before ICARDA, but with ICARDA and with ESCWA and the League of Arab States on the importance of having good measurements, good information, because if you don't have the measurement, you will not get finance. And financing agriculture and water project is very difficult. It's not a coincidence that financing goes more to energy project, whereas the priorities in the region are for water, agriculture, and health. Yet these are not well measured, and that's the problem for attracting them. Also, they are not as remunerative as the installing energy projects. And you install panels, it brings you money the second day. You want to work on a water metering, on water harvesting, it takes time to have it. So you need to be thinking of blended finance. You need to be thinking of areas where you support you create an enabling environment for the private sector to invest in them. And you really need the capacity. I think first and foremost is the capacity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rula. We have somebody from the Child Fund also. Thank you so much for attending.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for this productive and fruitful discussion. I'm highly enjoyed the discussion. Even if I'm here, I'm directly going to my area, especially the rural context. The small scale context is similar with our context. So I enjoyed on your discussion. When it comes to my experience regarding to especially climate smart agriculture, my name is Shibru Fikadu, livelihood program specialist at a Child Fund country office level. We are running similar project, 2 active projects, which is directly related to climate smart agriculture. So as you mentioned, the more challenge, especially for small scale farmers, is inclusive financing. Financing is the main challenge. So what we did, there is because small scale farmers has no collateral, no guarantee, even microfinance institutions don't accept them, even to get a loan, to get a credit, to do many things, because of most of the project is, even when we target, we address the poorest of the poor or the small scale farmers. But when going to directly to implement the project, we faced the finance issue. As a Child Fund, we have an active project which is funded by BMZ project. At this time, we develop one methodology. If you know, I don't know, VSL methodology, village saving and the loan association methodology. That is a good methodology, especially for small scale farmers. They collect saving from their own self, even if they don't matter the biggest or the smallest amount of that money, but they revolve saving from among themselves as a group base. It is homogeneous. Then they run their own business, different IGA, income generating activities, through their own saving practices. Even if that loan is not enough to run income generating activities, but they practice. After 3 or 4 years, they managed, they plan, and they manage, and they build different assets. That methodology helps us to incorporate small scale farmers into the project. So the VSL methodology, that is a very important one. Regarding to the climate smart agriculture, as you know, our country has different agroecological agroecology. There is highland, midland, and the lowland. Especially the Rift Valley are highly prone drought areas. So when we initiate this climate smart agriculture, most of the time we faced recycle drought. Drought is a major issue. So we focused on agroecological friendly varieties like crops, vegetables, even agroforestry. We focused on drought areas. Also technology of water harvesting technology, right? From roof harvest. Even we built some rock pond, cistern rock pond construction to harvest the water. Even if we get rain, minimum of 3 or 4 days, especially in rural area, in Rift Valley areas. So we harvest. That's also one climate smart agriculture. The other is we focused in organic compost preparation. That's also one important thing. Rather than based on inorganic chemicals, we focused on organic compost preparation. That's like using of vermiworm. That's also an important issue. We also produce different compost preparation on that area. The other issue also, as my brother mentioned, alternative diversification of livelihood. That's one thing. We not only focused on farm, we focused on off-farm and the non-farm activities. Our communities has many indigenous knowledge. we have to stress, we have to underline indigenous knowledge at a community level. Most of the indigenous knowledge are context-based, so we focused on indigenous knowledge. And also we built the social asset at community level. We built the social asset because there are human assets at community level. Especially regarding the drought, we have to integrate the knowledge, the scientific base with the indigenous base knowledge. That's also very important to meet the climate smart agriculture. The other main issue is also at country level, we are promoting climate resilient green strategy at country level. Also, we are green legal initiative at country level. That also helps us to aware to cascade at low land areas. Even if we are running, still we face this finances, the major problem to include small scale farmers. This is all what we are doing. If this is maybe Tina, I will share you the document later, what we did regarding the climate smart agriculture through BMZ fund projects and foreign seed projects. We achieved a good result. This is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience from Kenya. I assume
From Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, sorry.
From
Ethiopia. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, it was a very rich discussion in the end. On a Friday morning, we've covered a lot of different topics, product design, access, policies, collaboration, blended finance, capacity, sustainability issues. I think it's a very mixed bag, but also a lot of good ideas were shared. I thank you very much for joining us this morning and for your active participation, and wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you so much. Thank you.